This is all theater. This is all just political theater.
Political theater. Political theater.
Pure political
Theater.
Theater.
Political theater.
The
nefarious,
Significant and protracted
political
theater for political theater's sake.
I yield back.
From Washington, this is Political Theater, Roll Call's review of the spectacle of politics on Capitol Hill and across the country. I'm Jason Dick. Well, welcome back to Political Theater. We are going to be talking about one of our favorite things to do in the year, which is the Most Vulnerables list. I know this is a lot of fun for our campaign team, especially when it's a year and a half out. But this is a franchise that Roll Call has had for going back several years, in which we identify the most vulnerable incumbents of the cycle. This is not open seats. Those are a whole different universe that we report on, but this in particular is we're looking at the most vulnerable incumbents. We usually wait until around this time. We're recording this on May 7th, 2025, because we get retirement announcements. We want to see what the political dynamics are in a new, in an off year. Is there really a such thing as an off year?
Not anymore.
In politics, no. But we like to gather as much data as possible, even though we kind of teased it. We sort of did a Star Wars prequel kind of version of people who are potentially vulnerable earlier this year. Our team has been working on this, and we're rolling it out this week, and it is on rollcall.com. Daniela Altimari and Mary Ellen McIntire join the podcast to talk about this. Welcome back, both of you.
Thank you. Hello.
We are also in the country dacha of podcast recording locales for us. We bounce around a little bit in the CQ Roll Call newsroom. The glass cage of emotion that I usually am in solo just gets kind of cramped and stuffy. But this is the old school podcast studio, the TV studio that we used, Mel, you and I and Andrew a few weeks ago. Just it needed a little bit of cleaning up. There was a little bit of it just wasn't fit at the time. So we went back to the source. So thanks for coming. So let's start with talking about the most vulnerable senators. It's a small list. So how do we want to start? Do you want to set up the kind of methodology? Because I think one of the more stressful things about this, having seen it from the outside as an editor, is it's not even so much like ranking people. It's just all the guff you have to take from the political operatives who are arguing that guy or that woman needs to be ahead of mine. It's just this inundation. So why don't you talk a little bit about the methodology first before we get to the rankings?
Yeah, we don't make these up out of thin air. We base it on reporting, and we talk to lots of different folks from all parties and all sides and all kinds of stakeholders to see what their take is. And it's a fairly rigorous process. We interview them. We often go back to them and discuss some more. And when we're having sort of trouble, ordering the list, we do go back again. It's fairly time consuming because we want to make sure we get it as right as we can. And again, it's just based on, like everything we do is based on reporting and factual information that's out there. So.
Yeah, that's a common. It's the amount of information you have to go through, whether it's the party registration in the district, yes, whether it's polling, whether it's the current polling for people who aren't, like for the president, say,
yes,
or the dynamics of the state itself, whether it's been through a natural disaster lately or,
exactly,
like something like that. It's just there's so many different factors, and they change too.
And at this early stage of the game, a lot of what we're doing is looking at what happened just 6 months ago with the election
right,
in 2024. So that weighs very heavily because that's, a lot of these fields aren't even set yet. There aren't opponents in some of these races. So we are looking at a lot of data and a lot of, like you said, the president's vote margin and things like that.
Right. So let's talk. Let's start with the Senate. And again, this was among the smaller lists that we've had in a while. I mean, it's not that we always felt that we had to hit 10. It's just that we usually did. And this time we weren't even close.
And I think that one of the biggest reasons for that is, if you look back to the first top 10 list that we did 2 years ago in May of 2023, we hadn't seen the number of retirements that caused open seats that we have seen in the first few months of this year with Michigan, New Hampshire, Minnesota, which are all kind of key states in the battleground this year, not on this list, as well as some of these states that 6 years ago, when this class of senators was last on the ballot, the politics of the states were just like a little bit different. I'm thinking of states like Iowa, Alaska, that, potentially as the cycle goes on could come on the list, but in part because we don't know who these folks are going to be challenged by, it's hard to say right now that they're vulnerable. And that could change, particularly as the, political ecosystem continues to develop over the next 6 months and next year and a half before the election. But yeah, the open seats in particular really kind of helped us to shrink this list down a little bit. And frankly, I think when we discussed sort of our very, very early look at who could potentially start to be on these lists a few months ago, there was potential for more primaries in some of these Republican-held seats that aren't necessarily expected to be competitive
At the general.
The general election to have competitive primaries. I'm thinking of someone like Joni Ernst, who, at the time was unclear if she was going to support Pete Hegseth as defense secretary. There was a lot of talk about if she did not support Hegseth, whether a primary challenger from the right could come at her. She obviously did support Hegseth and has not sort of gotten a high profile, legitimate primary challenger at this point. So she, has not come onto this list at this point yet.
Right. And at this point, we don't consider, and most people don't consider Iowa and a general election, statewide election, competitive for Democrats. That, again, anything can change, but at this point, in this point in time.
That's a good point, though, because, one of the things that we do that I think might be different from some others who look at these sort of rankings is we're not necessarily focused on states where the seat is going to flip or the other party is going to gain control. We're looking at incumbents who are vulnerable, whether that's in the general election for somebody of the opposing party or a primary. So that's why we have 2 folks on our list, 2 incumbent senators, Republicans, who could face difficulty through a primary. One of them at least perhaps could also face a tough general election. We don't know yet, but for sure they both face high profile primary challenges. So that's one of the things we do.
Yeah, let's start talking about the Senate because it's a small bag, but it's an interesting one. And the first one is
Jon Ossoff of Georgia.
Yes.
He comes in at number 1. This is a Democrat running in a state that Trump won by 2 points just about last year. And, he's cutting an interesting campaign so far. He is definitely running as a Democrat. He's not necessarily in so much as like on the stump as he's sort of been traveling Georgia, really kind of trying to strike a moderate tone. He's, raised the potential of supporting impeachment of Donald Trump, quite notably, which Republicans have, already started going after him on. He has taken some votes that, have sided with Republicans as well, sort of, the type of votes that you would expect a Democrat in a swing state to have taken over the last 5 months here. But I will say, Brian Kemp, who was Republican's top recruit in the state this week, announced that he was passing Governor Kemp. Yes. He's going to pass on a Senate run. And, that's definitely a big win for Democrats. He would have, really set this race up as likely like the top race in the country. Because of the dynamics of Georgia, him being a Democrat in a state that just voted for Trump.
But did vote for Biden in 2020. So, yeah.
Yes, in a slightly different, vibe of the time. It was COVID.
Yeah, we were all wearing masks.
Yeah. So, but, we'll see. We did consider moving him after the Kemp news, which came out right before. Candidly, Tom
literally
Tillis,
hours.
Literally hours. We thought we were set, and then this came up, and it led to some last minute discussion. And Tom Tillis of North Carolina is in our number 2 spot, and ultimately, you look at North Carolina and Georgia, comparing the political dynamics of these states and going back and forth. Tillis is a Republican running in a state that Trump won by 3 points. He was in that group of Republican senators who there's been a lot of talk about primary challengers. And while he has drawn Republican challengers, they haven't necessarily been of the caliber yet to, give him a really, really tough primary election. We'll see what happens in the coming months.
Also, before we go into number 3, I just wanted to note, too, that Senator Most Vulnerable list came out on Tuesday, May 6th. A few out, and with Tillis in the second spot, and even in the paper, he's there with another person on the list, Bill Cassidy, and then a couple hours later, he's just like, "Oh, you think I'm vulnerable now? Well, let's see about getting on to number one." It says he won't support Donald Trump's nomination of Ed Martin to be U.S. Attorney for D.C. because of his comments and support for people who attacked the Capitol on January 6th. He was a lawyer defending many of those folks, and just said, "I'm not going to support." Immediately got threats, there's worries about him being doxxed and so forth. So the possibility of a primary challenge went up. For
he's navigating some tough terrain, from both the left and the right.
Yeah.
And I think that's going to be interesting. One more point before we leave Ossoff, he did raise $11 million.
Yeah, more money than the Federal Reserve, it seems.
Such an enormous sum of money.
And he's always been able to do that. I remember when he was running for the House special election that he lost initially in 2017 or 18 or whatever it was. I mean, he raised more money than some country's GDP, and it just kept on doing. He's always been able to do that, and he's, it's not like he's some plugged-in finance kid or something like that. I mean, he seems to have a talent. I mean, he's young. He was a documentary filmmaker or whatever. So it's not the typical profile for somebody who just raises money hand over fist. But money is not going to be an issue for him.
No.
Or for Tillis, right? I mean, Tillis has been raising money. He's running for re-election too, right?
Yeah. I would say the Ossoff number was striking. The Tillis number is more in the realm of kind of what you expect.
Human possibility.
Kind of thing. I mean,
no, Ossoff is batting 400.
Yeah.
Right? Tillis is 300, 301.
Sure.
Maybe,
But I will say, $11 million, obviously it's striking. It's a lot of money. It's also an indication that he knows this is going to be a tough race and that he's going to need those resources down the stretch. So, both sides of that.
Yes.
Right. So number 3, then, from Tillis to
Susan Collins. Maine.
All right.
She is the only Senate Republican currently holding a seat for a state that supported Kamala Harris in last year's presidential election. Yep. Certainly no stranger to these lists while she's, in a re-election cycle. And we will see. Democrats really threw everything they had at her 6 years ago in the 2020 race. And she, Sarah Gideon still has lots of money in her Senate campaign account.
Which begs the question of why? Why did she leave so much money on the table or in the bank instead of just throwing everything into that race? I realize at a certain point, the television ads are booked or Facebook ads or whatever. Yeah. But that seemed like Democrats got overconfident that year, and they were like, "Okay, we got this," and that wasn't super close either.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I was not on this team that cycle, so I'm not totally sure. But I think the biggest question for Susan Collins is who is going to challenge her. Jenna Mills, Democratic governor, is term limited, so she's not running for re-election. She has sort of, I believe what she said a couple weeks ago is that she doesn't currently have plans to run for Senate, which is not a huge vote of confidence, but also not saying I'm not running for Senate.
Such a taciturn Maine thing.
Yes. So
I'm going to work on the cabin. That's the worst Maine accent ever, I know. Sorry. Apologies to all Mainers out there.
I'm from the one neighboring state, and I don't even know what a Maine accent is. So,
well, there's 3 places in the earth, right? According to Mainers, there's Maine, there's South Maine, and then there's away. So you just have to divide the world into those 3 categories.
Well, then we're all from away.
Yes.
But yeah, we'll see if Mills challenges her. She's drawn one challenger, the former chief of staff to former Congresswoman Katie Porter from California, who's originally from Maine. There's talk of Jared Golden potentially looking at either a Senate run or a gubernatorial run. He did previously work for Collins, so I think the thinking is that he's a little less likely to run for Senate, but hasn't necessarily weighed in either way.
And we'll talk about him in a little bit.
We will, yeah. He's more to come.
Speaking of governors running for things against vulnerable incumbents.
But yeah, Collins, by nature of being in a blue state, she's on the list. She's, a proven winner. She'd be seeking a 6th term. So she's got a strong brand, but it's going to be a competitive race. And yeah, we'll see.
It'll be interesting to see if her the cliche is that she's very concerned, right? She's always very concerned about something that Donald Trump is doing, and so if those concerns are enough to assuage people to keep like voting for the person, because it does seem like in Maine voters know Susan Collins. She's been around for a long time in Maine politics, and it's less that they see a Republican or a Democrat. They see Susan Collins, who they're voting for. And whether that survives in this era that is so defined by party identification is something that she will have to navigate, and that Golden, who again we'll talk to eventually, like he is also navigating it too.
I'm curious in this race in particular, so far, kind of a difference from the last couple of election cycles. I don't necessarily feel as if reproductive rights have sort of been a defining theme of, talking about politics so far. I don't think that's odd. I think, coming off of a Trump win and, the Republican Congress attempting to enact his agenda, I'm not surprised that we're not currently talking a lot about reproductive rights. But I do think that Susan Collins, a pro-choice Republican, has not been on the ballot since the fall of Roe v. Wade.
Right.
And she, did vote for Brett Kavanaugh, who supported that Supreme Court decision. So I think that is one where potentially that could be an issue that is addressed and litigated in some way.
And one more to complete, one for the thumb.
So then we go into the two Republicans who are primarily right now vulnerable in primaries, and that's Bill Cassidy of Louisiana and
so two for the thumb.
Yeah, John Cornyn of Texas. Both have drawn Republican challengers already. Bill Cassidy is one of the 7 Republicans who voted to convict Donald Trump in his second impeachment trial, and that is sort of the big issue why
hung over him like a lot.
Yes. Yeah. So John Fleming, the state treasurer, is challenging him. And I think there's, sort of another unopen question of whether any other Republicans get into that race and try to challenge him.
And we don't have the jungle primary anymore.
Right. So that's another interesting sort of factor. I think that, if had that been the way forward, I think that probably would have helped him. I think that, having Republican voters in a primary, it's just another factor to consider, as to why he's going to have more of a race. But, we've also kind of seen him trying to take steps to, show MAGA that he's, working with them. The chair of the Help Committee, he voted for Robert F. Kennedy Jr. as the Health and Human Service Secretary, which I think was notable.
No small thing, since Cassidy's a doctor and understands that vaccines work.
He was very publicly grappling with this. At the confirmation hearing, he's pretty openly being like, please say the things that would help.
Give me a shred of dignity in voting for you, sir.
So I think we'll see what happens. His campaign has put out polling that, does look, like he still has a shot. He's certainly not out of this by any means.
And the jungle primary, by that, I mean, it was weirder than even like the top 2 races that we see otherwise.
The primary was held on general election day.
On general election day. And if you got 50% plus 1, you won.
Yes.
The primary and the general.
Yes.
And if you didn't, there's a runoff between the top 2 finishers.
Yeah.
And again, even though Louisiana is quirky, that was quirky by all political standards. It's like somebody came up with that on like the day after Mardi Gras.
It was also
this sounds like a good idea.
In early September to be like, want to write like primary season is done, except for Louisiana.
Well, and it's also just led. I mean, Georgia has has runoffs too.
Yeah.
So sometimes we don't even know who's in the majority until after the Congress is sworn in, because sometimes those runoffs don't happen until after the Congress is sworn in. So it's like, wait, this happened in 2021 with Ossoff
and
Warnock. Yeah. So sorry, Cornyn.
No, Cornyn. Yeah, take it away.
Yeah, I mean that has the potential to be a bloodbath, to put it plainly. I mean, you've got 2 guys who Cornyn and Ken Paxton, strongly dislike would be probably the understatement of the year. They're already throwing, I mean,
Paxton's longtime
yes,
Attorney General.
Attorney General
Yeah.
has a whole trail of ethical liabilities that have already been dredged up by the Cornyn folks. I think one of the things will be fascinating to see is where Donald Trump lands in this one. He was asked about it recently and said something
He likes them both.
He likes them both. And we do know in the past, Trump has double endorsed folks. He has endorsed two people running for the same seat. I don't know how that works because, everyone gets one vote. So
I'm going to pull a Princess Bride quote now here with I don't think if you've double endorsed somebody I don't think that word means what you think it means, right?
Yeah, I don't think so either. I mean, I don't know what it means, but it's kind of like, I don't know. Trump will be Trump, and I guess we'll see as we go forward. But regardless of that, I think that's going to be a key issue. But also, this is just going to be an incredibly expensive and ugly battle. And whoever wins, Texas is a deep red state. We keep hearing, purple Texas and all these things like that, and that's been tried and tested, many times. And
There's the
failed.
purple slivers
Yes,
right here.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, you can ask Beto O'Rourke or, Colin Allred about that because they were both.
Or any Democrat over the last 30 years, right?
Exactly. I mean, but, recently that's kind of gained a little currency. And every time it happens, Texas reverts back to its Texasness and goes red. So, but despite that, whoever emerges from this primary could be badly bruised. And Colin Allred is actually thinking about running, as is Beto O'Rourke. They both said,
what else have they got to do?
They're leaving the
Run
door
for
open. So we'll see, but I think whatever happens, we know it's going to be a bumpy ride for Texas.
All right. The House.
The
House
House.
vulnerables. Yeah.
Tough for me to lose sleep.
Yes. All right. Awesome. But at the top of the list
is Adam Gray, freshman of California.
Yes. I've noticed, looking at the list, that there are a few people here who literally won their races by a few hundred votes.
Yeah.
We didn't know for weeks. And it's California. I don't know what they do, whether they count with abacuses or something, but we didn't know about Adam Gray winning until
I think that was
5 weeks or something like that.
Yeah. And it was less than 200 votes. Yeah. Really tight district. This district, when last cycle, was near the top of the list as well. So, I think that just shows this is, a competitively fought district, regardless of.
And this and remind me where this is in California. It's not the most
Central Valley, San Joaquin Valley. It's a working class district, large population of Hispanic voters. So again, it could come to play out where that's one of those districts, like perhaps South Texas and other places where if we do have a rough economy, if things continue to take a slide and tariffs and farming, rural industries are hurt, Democrats could be in better shape than they had been in the past, because those are places where Trump has been making, or Republicans, but specifically Trump has been making gains.
And the fact that Gray won it with all those trends going against Democrats last year was a bit of a surprise. I mean, it didn't make a difference in the overall. I mean, that was the one seat Democrats gained, at the very end.
Yeah.
But barely.
Yeah, but barely. And, and some of those voters, in a midterm, with Trump not on the ballot, they may end up just staying home. So they may, could shift the dynamic as well. Yeah. It's interesting. But, you mentioned close races. Certainly that was a kind of a handy way for us to look at things, because really all of our, certainly our top 5 most vulnerable incumbents all won their races by exceptionally narrow margins, I think all less than 1%. So, that's usually an indication that these districts are, as you mentioned, most of the country is very polarized. Texas is red and, other states are blue. And, there's just these sort of clear trends. And the few places that are battlegrounds are really where things get interesting. So.
Yeah. Number 2.
Gabe Evans, also a freshman.
Yeah.
I think in the top half of this list, part of part of the reason that I think so many freshmen find themselves on this list is that running for re-election the first time is really hard.
It is.
It's, the more you've been on the ballot, not in every race, but largely, it starts to get maybe a little easier.
Yes.
But I think for freshmen, you just don't have the biography. People are still getting to know you. They're seeing, okay, we voted for you, but like, do we actually like you in office?
And he was one of the first of majority makers for that series that she did too. So yeah.
And I think when you look at that district, it does have some overlap with, with the one we just talked about in California as well. Large percentage of Latino voters. It's a really a
Denver suburbs.
Yeah, northern suburbs of Denver. Again, we're heavily working class, and also I think so. I'm not actually sure what cities are in there, but it does. It's the kind of place where economic issues may play very heavily. So
he's been leaning in, talking a lot about like sanctuary cities as well around the Denver area. And he's interesting. He's drawn 2 challengers so far, one of whom is the congresswoman who he beat last year, Yadira Caraballo,
who was also another freshman.
Yes. Case in point.
Yeah.
And then also Manny Rutinel, who is he a state official?
Yeah, he's a legislator. And he raised a lot of money.
He raised over $1 million in the first quarter.
Yeah. And there may be others who enter as well, other Democrats. So that's going to be one to watch, new district also. So we don't really have any sort of long-term trends there. So
Number 3.
Ryan McKenzie of Pennsylvania, a third freshman. You're seeing a theme. Yeah. I think that, this district.
This is northeastern Pennsylvania. Yeah, kind of.
Yeah. One of 2 of him and Rob Bresnahan in the neighboring district were 2 of the first Republicans to sort of flip.
This is like Allentown.
Yes, this is the Allentown district. Previously held by Susan Wild, who I believe she said she's not getting in, or has sort of suggested that, she was going back and forth.
She's endorsed the Democrat.
Yeah. So we'll see. This is a district that,
again, working class
district.
Latino. Yeah.
And
I'm sensing a trend.
Yeah.
And I think that one of the big questions in this cycle is sort of going to be Latinos went for the Republicans in this past election. And like, is it a one-time thing? Is this a long-term trend? If you look at this district specifically, Trump carried it by 3.2 points and McKenzie won by 1 point. So it'll be a question of how can he do on the ballot without Trump above him. He'll have the advantage of incumbency, which even for a freshman is an advantage.
Right.
And he's sort of been interesting to watch in his first couple of months. Notably, he joined Mike Lawler, sort of a poster child of, House Republicans from
who's also on the
swing districts in a CNN town hall a few weeks ago, which I was, interested to sort of see him, taking that kind of similar approach of, okay, I'm going to get out there. And obviously, Lawler, like you said, he's on the list a little lower down. He's one of the 3 Republicans in seats that Harris carried in last year's election. But he's really made it a point to like be out in front of the camera. Yep. So interesting to sort of see McKenzie taking a similar tack there.
Right. I can't wait to talk about Lawler, but I know he's a little further down. So next.
Next is Marionette Miller-Meeks of Iowa.
Who won by like 1 vote, I think, right? Or a vote? If there could be half votes, she would have won by a half vote.
She
a few more. That's right.
A nickname, Six Pack or something, because in 2020 she won by 6 votes.
Yeah, by 6. And she won by the incredibly comfortable margin of like 200 votes this time or something.
Yeah.
700, I believe.
700 something, yeah.
It's crazy. It's crazy.
This
is not a swing district either.
No, it's there's just something there that has made it challenging for her specifically. And she is one of the top targets for Democrats.
This is eastern Iowa.
Yeah.
The river.
She does not have a formal opponent yet, but Christina Bohannon, who came close, actually she ran twice against her and came really close this time. She may be running again. She's a professor, I think, from University of Iowa, a law professor. So we'll see. I mean, but that one, I don't know. That's just weird. It's just an anomaly. And then the next one is Derek Tran, who is also interesting candidate. He unseated Michelle Steele in Orange County. He's the first Vietnamese American to represent Orange County's Little Saigon area, son of immigrants. Interesting story. He's a lawyer. But that's also, this is an incredibly expensive district, Southern California media market. So that one, just by nature of its location, I think will be getting a lot of attention.
I'm also fascinated by the ethnic breakdown there.
Yeah.
I mean, you have a Vietnamese American, Korean American.
Yes.
I mean, just like all the. I mean, Orange County is this incredibly diverse place.
Yes.
I mean, it has a reputation of being like, this is where Richard Nixon's from. And
Yes.
It's very white and it's
Yes.
very rich. It's like, it's still very rich compared to
Yeah.
like most places, but it's actually way more diverse
Yes.
now than you would think from going to Nixon's house in Yorba Linda.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And that district and a neighboring one represented by Young Kim, also Orange County, which is she's not quite as, she certainly didn't make our top 10. She's not quite as vulnerable, but she could emerge, as things move forward, she could emerge as somebody to watch. So, yeah.
Who's next? Getting closer to Lawler.
On the back half of the list, we have 5 members who I think are interesting. They all represent districts won by the presidential candidate of the opposite party. Yeah. At the same time, they're all kind of proven that they can win in tough districts, which is a little bit different than the top half, which is mostly freshmen. Yeah. However, looking at vulnerability specifically, these are vulnerable members. Yep. They're going to be, running close, expensive races. Once, you start seeing super PAC and outside group spending next year, these districts are going to be getting those ads. So the next member is Marie Gluesenkamp Perez,
Yep.
From Washington.
Another majority maker. That we've profiled.
She has gotten a lot of play. She's an auto mechanic. It's a working class district, or she owns an auto repair shop. Her and her husband, I think.
She wears hearts.
And she, she's sort of gained a lot of attention as kind of the type of blue dog that Democrats need to kind of win back these working class voters.
Yeah, she's one of like 2 left now. Or something.
Yeah, basically. But and she won, fairly comfortably last time. But I think the test for her this time around, it's the first time she's not running against a guy named Joe Kent, who was widely seen, even privately by some Republicans, is not exactly the strongest opponent. So this will be kind of a test for that brand. She's also gotten some pushback from some on the left. They've come to some of her town halls, unhappy with some of her votes. Whether they, ultimately have an impact or not, I think we'll see. But
she has town halls, though.
She has had town halls, yes, in-person town halls, which have drawn big crowds. So, yeah.
And so has the next person on our list, Mike Lawler. He's been one of the few Republicans holding town halls.
One of the reasons for I think he's so interesting too is that he, like what you're saying about Ossoff earlier, he has not hidden from the fact that he's a Republican.
Yeah.
That he supports Donald Trump, that he has ambitions to maybe be governor. He's very. It's easy for a Republican in New York to criticize Chuck Schumer and Kathy Hochul, but he is not shy. He takes questions in hallways. He does town halls. He is out there. He's the type of, and I think that works well for him, even with a Democratic district where everybody appreciates it if you show up and answer questions, even if they don't like your answers. They appreciate the fact that they can get an answer instead of hiding behind and I'm doing a telephone town hall. That's lame. And I think Lawler is somebody who knows that.
He's a very good politician. He's a really consultant.
Good.
He's
very good retail.
Yeah.
Very good retail. Yeah.
Kind of similar to Marie Gluesenkamp Perez. It's, he ran against Mondaire Jones, a former member of Congress, in the last election, generally kind of considered a Democrat who had some weaknesses. There is no shortage of Democrats lining up to challenge him this cycle. Mm-hmm. I think there are at least 5 candidates who I've gotten press releases from about running.
And Trump made a personal appeal on Truth Social for him to stay in the House, not run for governor. He Stefanik'd Lawler as much as he can. Can we make that a verb? You've been Stefanik'd.
Yeah, we'll see. I think, without Lawler in running for this seat, I think this becomes such a good pickup opportunity for Democrats if he were to decide to run for governor instead of run for the House. But he's going to be tough to beat, for sure. But, he knows as well as anybody what the political dynamics of his district are and that he's facing. a tough race. It's not news to him, but I think that, goes to show why he's, one of these people who's getting out there and holding the town halls. And he started last cycle on this list. And at some point along the way, it was pretty clear that he was not in the top most vulnerable grouping. So we'll kind of see what happens. I think by nature of this being so early in the process of a full election cycle, and kind of just not necessarily having a great sense of like the political ecosystem and how things are shaping up. Still, he's on the list because of the dynamics of his district, as is Don Bacon,
Yes.
who is in a district that Harris won by, I think, 5 points almost.
Omaha.
Omaha.
The blue dot.
The blue dot.
Blue dot.
Yep. And
Nebraska.
and few people have been able through the years to defy sort of the leanings of the district better than Don Bacon. I mean, he's just again been very good and very lucky, or a combination of the two, and he's been able to win despite a district that certainly leans blue. He there are a couple of folks who have said that they are going to be running against him. He's also, I guess, like we mentioned with Tillis, navigating a little bit of rough waters with the Trump administration. He did call on Trump or he suggested that Trump should fire Pete Hegseth, which, for a Republican, I think he was, one of the early ones out there voicing that kind of criticism.
He's a military man. So.
Exactly. Strong military background. And, he's also suggested maybe he won't run again. He might retire. So we'll see, how the cycle proceeds. I think most Republicans are kind of the belief that if he does retire, they could kind of say goodbye to that seat, at least for now, because, for some reason, Bacon has continued to win. But whether that translates to another Republican who doesn't have that strong brand. Is certainly a strong question.
It's been interesting. We haven't seen the kind of retirement announcements in the House from either party that we've been seeing sort of early on in the Senate. We've got a couple of House Democrats who have announced that they are going to retire, but there really just hasn't been. And I think that, especially on the Republican side, is due to them still working on their legislative agenda and this reconciliation process. But it is certainly interesting and sort of different than I recall from some past cycles where you've gotten some earlier retirement announcements and open seats forming.
Yeah. Next,
Jared Golden.
Sure. There's the golden moment.
Back to Maine.
So,
Back to Maine. Congratulations to the Mainers. Yeah, he won by less than a point in a district that Trump won by 9 points.
It'd be like a stock car driver or something, right?
Yeah, like all these folks on the back half of the list, it's the district dynamics. He
a lot of potatoes.
Has a really strong brand.
Potato farmers. Well, there were. I don't know if there still
are. Fun fact: my hometown was, I believe, or a former iteration of my hometown was where the first potato in the United States was ever grown.
Whoa!
Wow.
I know. Famed
And you
claim.
say you're Irish.
Weird, right? But yeah, Golden, it's a little bit tough. We'll see how this district shakes out. He's always, a contender for these lists because of the district dynamics.
And Paul LePage, who's the former two-term governor of Maine, has announced to run this week. Right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think that's interesting. LePage, former governor, but also then, lost re-election for governor, I think, or did he not? No, I'm now going back to many years and I can't remember exactly what happened.
I'm blanking on it.
Yeah.
But I mean, he had like sort of worn out his welcome
Yes.
at a certain point. But he also likes to portray himself as I was Trump before Trump.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. But this is the more conservative district in the state. So he could find that he still has a base of support. He only announced 3 days ago. So I think we're still kind of waiting to see what his support and how that is all shaping up if anybody else gets into the race. But yeah, interesting.
And bringing up the last.
Don Davis of North Carolina.
Yeah.
Also no stranger to this list. So yeah, Davis, it's the district dynamics. He has drawn a old but new challenger, Sandy Roberson, who lost a primary in 2022 here. I think he could potentially be a stronger Republican candidate than some of their past candidates against Davis in this district. He's a mayor of the area. There's
Run something before.
Yeah, he's run before. He has, similar to Don Davis, he has like a political base and people who know him in a way that Lori Buckhout was newer to the district and didn't have the same electoral background before she ran last year. So I think that could potentially make for an interesting matchup. I believe he also has the ability to self-fund, which, is does not necessarily mean anything. Lori Buckhout also had the ability to self-fund, but is notable given how much money is important here. And I think this is like an interesting district. It's quite rural on the eastern side of North Carolina with, a lot of folks moving in and out in a way that, if that continues, people just have to reintroduce yourself to new voters in the district if you're sort of in that transient kind of district.
Yeah. Well, this is a lot. Thank you so much. And, we get to do it again in a couple months, right? Yay! No, but I think this is just really, the research that goes into this, it's great stuff. And the nice thing is, too, is it changes all the time. So.
Yeah, it does. I do think that, what's so interesting, and I've actually been looking back a lot at, our lists from last cycle and how it changed and who came on. And for much of last cycle, George Santos was at the top of the list before he was no longer in the House. And that was, Open Seat, and then Tom Suozzi won it. So it is really interesting to see. Like I said, we've had people who are on this list right now who've previously been on and moved off or were high on the list. And then it was like, oh,
they're fine.
You were number 4, but then you won. So it's good to look back throughout the cycle.
Yeah. Well, before we go, everyone's favorite part of the week. No, not really. It's just a nice added feature. It's just the bon mot of the podcast. This is the real substance, is the word of the week. And that is adverse report. The reason I chose this set of words was when when Tom Tillis announced that he was not going to support Ed Martin, it brings up the possibility that there will be a possible tie in the Judiciary Committee moving that nomination. That does not mean that the nomination is dead, because you can adversely report a nomination. It also, could be, there is the possibility, because senators can do whatever they want, that there is a possibility that it could move to the calendar, to the executive calendar, either by unanimous consent or using the Rule 14 process. But it is also not clear that Martin has even majority support from the entire from the body, from other Republicans. So the definition on adverse report, I just wanted to note, committee report recommending against approval of a measure or some other matter, like a nomination. Committees usually pigeonhole measures they oppose instead of reporting them adversely, but they may be required to report them by a statutory rule or an instruction from their parent body or their majority leader. It just depends. Or maybe the president with a Truth Social note. So who knows? So there is the possibility of an adverse report of a nomination to the floor of the United States Senate, which is one of the things that may happen with Ed Martin. We don't know. There's a lot that can happen between now and May 20th when he needs to either be withdrawn or he's facing a deadline just for a rule. So that's the words of the week, adverse report. Again, Daniela, Mel, thank you so much for talking about the most vulnerable list. And and thank you. Again, welcome back to the podcast studio. We've tried to gussy it up just a little bit. We're just, moving around the newsroom a lot. But thank you for listening out there, and we'll see you next time.